You know, something fascinating happens in the human mind that most people never become aware of. You go through life developing patterns, building beliefs, creating this entire framework of how you think the world works and how you should operate within it. You work hard, you develop knowledge, you create strategies for dealing with life, and you feel confident that you understand yourself pretty well. And then something happens, some challenge arises, some relationship falls apart, some opportunity appears. And suddenly all that self-knowledge you thought you had just flies out the window. You react in ways you don't understand. You make choices that surprise you. You feel emotions that seem to come out of nowhere. And you're left standing there thinking, what just happened? What on earth just happened? Well, the truth is most people don't understand their own psychology very well. If they understood their inner world differently than the way they understand it right now, they would be able to see that all that self-knowledge is only useful when your emotions and unconscious patterns are under management. Unfortunately, what happens in life is those emotions and patterns are not under management. What happens is the moment you hit uncertainty, the moment you face something that disrupts your normal way of being, all that biological programming and psychological conditioning that was hidden, pushed back into the depths of your unconscious, suddenly arises to the front and takes over your conscious mind.
Break the pattern today, or the loop will repeat tomorrow. Break the pattern today, or the loop will repeat tomorrow. You must break the pattern today, or the loop will repeat tomorrow.
And all of a sudden, you can't make decisions clearly. You can't see situations accurately. You can't respond to people effectively. You just absolutely start reacting from places you don't even recognize in yourself. And when you're in a calm, rational state, you would know better. You would act differently. But in the moment, something else is in control. So the bottom line, at the very core, a person really has to develop a better understanding of emotion, of themselves, and of their ability to perceive and think and act in an environment of uncertainty and change. This is what it means to develop emotional intelligence. This is what it means to actually know yourself rather than just thinking you know yourself. Now let's start with emotion itself, okay? What do you think an emotion is? Most people would say it's a feeling, right? It's something you experience internally, something that happens to you, something you either have control over or you don't. But in neurobiology, an emotion would be considered a biological action potential whose purpose is to coordinate activity between the organism and the environment that it's part of. Powerful, right? You hear that and you go, whoa, what's that all about? It's not just psychological. It's not just some abstract internal experience. It is literally about how the brain adapts and reacts to changes in the environment. Because at the very core, if you get that definition of emotion as biological action potential, you begin to understand how emotions actually show up. For vast amounts of research and study, what scientists have learned is that an emotion shows up at any moment that there is a disruption to a standard sensory pattern that the brain has already created. Now let's get that out of the textbook and into real life. What that actually means is when everything's fine, when you're operating on autopilot, when life is flowing according to the patterns your brain expects, you're in what we might call a baseline state. But then something changes. Someone says something unexpected. A situation doesn't unfold the way you anticipated. A memory surfaces that you weren't prepared for. A person behaves in a way that doesn't match your model of who they are. In that disruption, in that moment where the pattern breaks, an emotion, a biological action, potential that coordinates activity between you and your environment is going to take place. It's going to happen. It's only a matter of which emotion and how intense it becomes. And this is when you begin to have to understand something absolutely crucial. There is no such thing as freedom from emotion. What there is, and what you can develop, is freedom of emotion. You see the difference? You're not trying to eliminate emotions or transcend them or rise above them. You're learning to work with them, to direct them, to understand them so well that they become tools rather than tyrants. Life is full of challenge, and nothing typifies that more than relationships, than career decisions, than personal growth. Where there are constant disruptions to your expected patterns. You don't know how things are going to turn out, okay? No amount of control, no amount of force is going to change that fundamental uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen, so you're losing control over outcome, which we kind of have an illusion about anyway. And ultimately, then we get reactive emotions showing up. Fear, anxiety, anger, shame, despair. That's what we have to alter. That's what we have to learn to manage differently. How do you go about doing that? Because understand this, most people lose before they ever begin. They wake up, they go through their day in a mood where either anxiety or fear or inadequacy is running in the background. And they keep trying to push it away, push it away, push it away, ignore it. They tell themselves they're fine, they distract themselves, they stay busy. And yet the more they resist that emotion, the more the emotion persists. You begin to recognize, oh my gosh, I can't just ignore this because it's going to persist. It's going to keep showing up. And I need to really start looking at how do I manage this emotion rather than just avoiding it. The emotion is going to arise and trigger any time there is a change in status happening. This is constant in human life, okay? Constant. Relationships shift, circumstances change, your body ages, your mind encounters new information, your sense of self gets challenged. These disruptions are not occasional, they are the texture of existence itself. Now that we know what an emotion is, when we begin to look at the components of an emotion, it's what gives us great hope about being able to manage the emotion effectively. The components are this. First, there's arousal. Arousal you would experience as tightening of muscles, holding of breath, or fixation, like you're locked onto something, your attention narrows, you're gripping something, your jaw clenches. Or when you begin to feel or hear your heart rate beginning to race, your palms getting sweaty, your stomach tightening. What you're experiencing is the revving up of an emotion, getting you ready for action. Survival action, okay? That's the key. You're no longer in rational mind. What happens is the emotion is growing to take you into action where you don't have to think. It's all about survival now. This is the very place that change can happen. This moment of arousal, this is your window. This is your opportunity. If you can catch the emotion at this stage, before it takes over your entire system, you have power. You have choice. More about that in a moment. But understand, most people never even notice this stage. They're not paying attention to their body. They're not aware of the subtle signs. They're living entirely in their thoughts, completely disconnected from the physical sensations that are signaling an emotional state rising. The second component is feeling. Feeling is not some vague, touchy-feely concept. When you feel an emotion, you are literally experiencing the chemistry of that emotion in your body and your brain. When you feel fear, that's cortisol flooding your system. When you feel excitement or overconfidence, that's dopamine and adrenaline, a powerful mix that can lead to reckless decisions. When you feel shame, That's a whole cocktail of stress hormones. And when you feel that chemistry, it is altering the way you perceive, the way you think, the way you interpret reality itself. This is what happens when you say, well, I just got hijacked. I don't know what happened. Well, that's what's happening. You didn't see the emotion at arousal. You weren't able to arrest it or manage it. And it hit a particular threshold, a particular trip switch. And before you know it, what you have is chemistry taking over. In anxiety's case, cortisol. In rage's case, adrenaline and testosterone. In depression's case, low serotonin and dopamine. Horrible combinations for clear thinking. Okay? And ultimately, that takes over your rational mind. Your job as a conscious human being is to manage that emotion, to regulate it, before it gives rise to distorted thinking, before it creates the mind state that you bring into important moments of your life. That's the real key. So now we've got feeling and we've got arousal. The next part of an emotion that you really need to know about is motivation. Motivation in emotional terms is approach or avoid. It's basically the fight, flight, freeze response. And that's what all that building of energy is about. Your body is preparing you either to attack the threat, to run from it, or to freeze and hope it passes. And that's what you do not want dominating your psychology. You want to be able to notice the emotion growing. You want to manage the intensity. But you want to direct it away from fight, flight, freeze into approach, into that calm, confident, open mind that you want for navigating life effectively. When you're in approach motivation, you have clarity, you have discipline, you have curiosity, you're calm, you're cool, you're collected. Approach motivation means you've taken the same emotional energy that was growing for fight flight, but you've diverted it, you've redirected it into building a very different mind state. Really powerful stuff. This is what emotional intelligence actually looks like in practice. It's not suppressing emotions. It's not pretending you don't feel anything. It's recognizing the energy rising and consciously directing it toward approach rather than avoidance. The fourth part of an emotion is the beliefs that are tied to those emotions, to that reactiveness, that need to coordinate activity between you and your environment. Because ultimately that belief is really what determines which emotion arises and how intense it becomes. What you're seeing in your life, what you're seeing in the quality of your relationships, in your career trajectory, in your mental health, what you're seeing is the beliefs that you have about yourself and your ability to manage uncertainty. Okay? Whether or not they're effective or not. If your life is generally working, if your relationships are healthy, if you're growing and developing, yeah, it's very obvious that the beliefs that you're bringing to the management of uncertainty are effective. They're helping you navigate reality skillfully. If your life is stagnant or deteriorating, if you keep hitting the same walls, if you keep experiencing the same painful patterns, what you're looking at is the emotions and the meaning behind those emotions. Those beliefs that you're bringing into moments of challenge are not effective for managing uncertainty. They're probably very effective for managing survival, which is what they were designed to do. They're triggering you to survive, to protect yourself, to avoid pain. Whereas in what we might call growth mind, what you're doing is recognizing that life is fundamentally uncertain. You have a chance of things working out and not working out. You're focused on process rather than outcome. You're focused on who you're becoming rather than what you're achieving. That's how people actually develop. To do that, you have to have emotional awareness and regulation. And that's not done by willpower. It's not done by positive thinking. It's done by emotional intelligence, by actually understanding how your system works. So we've got this belief component. The last part of an emotion that I'll mention is temperament. Temperament is that part of your constitution that is governed by genetics. Some people are naturally more anxious, more reactive. Some people are naturally more calm, more stable. That's your baseline, your set point, and it's influenced by your biology. But here's what's important to understand. Even though temperament sets a baseline, it doesn't determine your destiny. You can learn to work with your particular temperament. You can develop skills that help you manage your natural tendencies. When you understand all this, when you start taking a look at the way to manage emotion, to manage the mind, you realize there are two huge portals, two major entry points for intervention. First, you need to become emotionally intelligent. You really do if you're going to live effectively, if you're going to have healthy relationships, if you're going to make good decisions under pressure. But those two portals are this. First, when you see the arousal component of an emotion, you literally need to become an observer of your body and your mind. In the body, you begin to see the telltale signs of arousal. The tension, the held breath, the increased heart rate, and you can learn through diaphragmatic breathing and progressive muscle relaxation. You can learn to relax that tension. By relaxing that biological tension and also altering the breath pattern, what you do is you control the intensity of the emotion that's arising. You can actually change it from fear, which requires shallow chest breathing, to calmness, which comes with slow diaphragmatic breathing. What you're looking at is the arousal is still there, the alertness is still there, but it's managed so that you're in a zone where you're focused and ready, but you have not triggered your body into fight-flight. You have that ability of moving over to approach motivation, where you can find the coolness, the calmness, and the confidence to manage uncertainty. It's no longer a threat to you. That's the point. So you're looking at that, and you're going, okay, I now understand that ultimately I have to become smarter about emotions, about what they are, how they work. Instead of trying to ignore them or suppress them, I need to turn toward them. I need to develop the ability to be with them, to observe them, to regulate them. And you can develop these skill sets. Emotional regulation skills, okay? Breath work, body awareness, mindfulness, these aren't just spiritual practices. They're practical tools for managing your neurobiology. And this has to happen. It's got to happen. Until you become emotionally intelligent and really start working with the body, you're not going to have the mind that's fit for life. You're going to be at the mercy of your reactions. The second piece, though, the second portal is this. No matter how much you regulate emotion at the physical level, you still only get to the door of the mind. You have to open the door of the mind and look in and find the beliefs that are roadblocks to the development of your potential. Okay? Really important. You have to develop that ability to observe your own thinking. You have to develop the skill of mindfulness, of stepping back out of thought, recognizing that you and your thoughts are not the same thing. You and your beliefs are not the same thing. This person that's moving through life is ultimately just one potential organization of a self. And that self was organized by a brain that was simply adapting you to the environment you grew up in. Nothing wrong with that. That's what brains do. However, now you may need to train the brain for a new environment, very different from the survival-focused environment you were raised in. To do that, you have to get into the belief systems. You have to examine them. You have to question them. You have to be willing to see that many of the things you believe about yourself and reality are not actually true. They're just patterns, conditioning, old programming. And the beliefs, when you really look at them, are pretty straightforward. What you're often confronting and finding is a sense of inadequacy. I'm not enough. I can't handle this. I'm going to fail. A sense of not mattering. I have to achieve something significant to be worthy. I don't deserve good things. I need to prove myself constantly. or powerlessness. Life happens to me. I have no control. Other people determine my experience. I'm a victim of circumstances. You've felt powerlessness before when you're in a situation that's changing rapidly and you feel like you're just being swung around by forces beyond your control. That's powerlessness. You have to learn to manage that feeling. You have to learn to find your ground even when circumstances are unstable. And you begin to see that the beliefs are literally about what beliefs do I hold about my ability to manage uncertainty, about my worth as a person, about my place in the world. That's the big deal. Ultimately, real psychological development teaches you how to 1. Calm the emotions down and get management of them. But more than that, to get much deeper, to be able to repair the sense of worth you have about yourself, and to be able to bring forward a very new set of beliefs. And this is not based on affirmations and visualizations and surface level techniques. Those are real surface things. It gets at the very core of what the belief structure is that has embedded itself into your neural networks. That's what counts. And you see that reflected in your life. You see it in your relationships, in your emotional patterns, in your responses to challenge. So you have a barometer. You have a meter that's telling you literally what are my beliefs that I am bringing to the management of uncertainty. Your life is going to tell you. Your emotional patterns are going to tell you. If you're listening, if you're paying attention, these are the things that I have found over time really help people understand why they don't have the ability to manage their knowledge and their intentions under pressure. Okay? The pressure of relationships, the pressure of uncertainty, the pressure of change. And those who become psychologically mature, who develop real self-awareness, recognize that you never had control over outcome. What you have control over is your process, your response, your internal state. You have control over the mind that you bring into the moment. That is the sign that you begin to recognize that this is growth-oriented psychology that you need for living well, rather than a survival-based psychology that is very useful when you're actually in danger, but creates suffering when applied to normal life. Now let me take you deeper into something that most people never consider. When you look at your emotional patterns, when you really examine them, what you're seeing is not just random reactions. You're seeing a highly organized system that your brain created to help you survive your particular childhood, your particular family system, your particular environment. And here's what's fascinating and troubling at the same time. That system, those patterns, they worked. They helped you survive. They helped you adapt to the environment you were in. But now you're not in that environment anymore. You're an adult. You're in different circumstances. You're facing different challenges. And yet those old patterns keep running. It's like you're running software that was designed for a different operating system. The program keeps executing even though it's no longer appropriate for the current situation. And this is where most people get stuck. They know they're reacting in ways that don't serve them. They can see it afterward. They can reflect and think, why did I respond that way? Why did I say that? Why did I shut down or lash out or withdraw? But in the moment, they couldn't stop it. In the moment, the pattern just ran automatically. This is because emotional patterns, once established, become procedural memory. They're not stored in the part of your brain that deals with conscious recall. They're stored deeper in the limbic system, in the amygdala, in areas that operate below conscious awareness. And once something becomes procedural, it runs automatically. You don't have to think about it. In fact, you can't easily think your way out of it. Think about learning to drive a car. At first, it required intense concentration. You had to think about every movement, every decision. Check the mirror, signal, check the blind spot, turn the wheel. It was exhausting, but over time, with repetition, it became automatic. Now you can drive and think about completely different things. Your body just does it. That's procedural memory. That's what practice creates. Well, emotional patterns work the same way. You practiced them thousands of times in childhood and adolescence. Feel threatened, withdraw. Feel criticized, defend. Feel uncertain, control. Feel vulnerable, hide. Over and over and over. And now those patterns run automatically. They're grooves worn deep in your neural pathways. And breaking those patterns, creating new grooves, requires more than just understanding. It requires practice, repetition, new experiences that create new procedural memories. This is why insight alone doesn't create change. You can understand why you do something and still keep doing it. You can trace your patterns back to childhood experiences and still feel powerless to alter them, because understanding happens in the prefrontal cortex, in conscious awareness. But the patterns are running from deeper brain structures that don't respond to logic or reason. They respond to experience, to feeling, to new patterns that get practiced consistently over time. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, when we talk about developing self-awareness, we're not just talking about understanding yourself better intellectually. We're talking about actually rewiring your nervous system. We're talking about creating new procedural memories that can compete with the old ones. And that takes time. It takes patience. It takes consistent practice. There's no shortcut. There's no magic bullet. But here's the good news. It is possible. Your brain remains plastic, capable of change throughout your entire life. You can create new patterns. You can develop new responses. You can literally rewire your nervous system. But you have to be willing to do the work. You have to be willing to sit with discomfort. You have to be willing to practice new ways of being even when they feel awkward and unnatural at first. Let me give you an example of how this actually works in practice. Let's say you have a pattern of withdrawing when you feel criticized. Someone says something that you interpret as critical, and immediately you feel that arousal. Your body tenses, your breath gets shallow, your heart rate increases, and before you even know what's happening, you've shut down. You've gone quiet. You've withdrawn emotionally. And you've done this so many times that it happens in a fraction of a second. You're not even aware of making a choice. It just happens. Now, developing emotional intelligence around this pattern doesn't mean you'll never feel criticized again. It doesn't mean you'll never have that initial arousal response. What it means is you develop the ability to notice it happening. You feel the tension rising in your body. You notice your breath getting shallow. You feel the urge to withdraw. And in that moment of noticing, you have a choice. You can let the pattern run automatically, or you can do something different. Maybe you take a slow breath. Maybe you consciously relax your shoulders. Maybe you stay present instead of checking out mentally. Maybe you ask a question instead of shutting down. These small interventions, practiced consistently over time, begin to create a new pattern, a new groove, and eventually the new pattern can become as automatic as the old one. But it takes repetition. It takes practice. It takes willingness to feel awkward and uncomfortable while the new pattern is still unfamiliar. This is the work of psychological development. This is what it actually means to grow and change. And most people don't want to hear this because it sounds hard. It sounds like it takes too long. They want a quick fix. They want a technique that will solve it immediately. But that's not how neurobiology works. That's not how change happens. Real change happens slowly, incrementally, through consistent practice over time. Now, let's talk about another layer of this, because it gets even more interesting when you understand how beliefs interact with emotional patterns. Your beliefs are not just abstract ideas floating around in your mind. They are predictions your brain makes about how reality works. Every belief you hold is essentially your brain saying, based on past experience, this is how things are. This is what to expect. This is what's true. And these predictions are incredibly powerful because they shape what you perceive. Your brain doesn't just passively receive sensory information and then interpret it. Your brain is constantly making predictions about what it's about to perceive, and those predictions actually shape what you end up experiencing. This is called predictive processing, and it's one of the most important discoveries in neuroscience in recent decades. Here's how it works. Your brain has models of reality built from past experience. When you encounter a new situation, your brain immediately generates predictions based on those models. What's about to happen? What does this mean? What should I do? And those predictions create expectations. And then your brain compares the incoming sensory information with the predictions. If they match, great, the prediction was correct. If they don't match, that's a prediction error, and that's when you really pay attention. That's when learning happens. That's when the brain updates its models. But here's the crucial part. The predictions themselves shape what you perceive. If you believe people are generally critical of you, your brain will be looking for evidence of criticism. It will be hypersensitive to any signal that might indicate disapproval, and it will interpret ambiguous signals as critical even when that wasn't the intent. This is confirmation bias in action. Your beliefs create the lens through which you see reality. So when we talk about limiting beliefs, beliefs like, I'm not good enough, or people can't be trusted, or I have to be perfect to be acceptable, we're not just talking about negative self-talk. We're talking about prediction models that are actively shaping your perception of reality moment by moment. These beliefs are creating the world you experience. And here's where it gets really tricky, because once a belief is established, your brain will tend to find evidence that confirms it. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. You believe you're not good enough, so you approach situations with anxiety and self-doubt, which affects your performance, which then confirms the belief. You believe people can't be trusted, so you're guarded and defensive in relationships, which creates distance and conflict, which then confirms the belief. The belief creates the behavior, which creates the outcome, which reinforces the belief. It's a loop, a cycle that perpetuates itself. Breaking this cycle requires intervening at multiple levels. You have to work with the emotions, regulating the arousal so you're not just reacting automatically. You have to work with the body, learning to recognize physical cues and consciously shift your state. And you have to work with the beliefs themselves, examining them, questioning them, looking for evidence that contradicts them, deliberately practicing new ways of thinking and being that challenge the old models. This is deep work. This is not surface-level self-help. This is actually reprogramming your nervous system, updating your prediction models, creating new patterns that are more adaptive, more flexible, more aligned with who you want to be, rather than who you were conditioned to be. And it's work that most people never do because it's uncomfortable. It requires you to face things you've been avoiding. It requires you to sit with uncertainty and discomfort. It requires you to question the very foundations of your sense of self. But here's what I want you to understand. This work is not optional if you want to live well, if you want healthy relationships, If you want to make good decisions, if you want to feel at peace with yourself, you have to do this work. There's no way around it. You can avoid it. You can distract yourself. You can stay busy. You can numb yourself. But the patterns will keep running. The suffering will continue. The same problems will keep showing up in different forms until you turn and face it, until you develop the willingness to look at what's actually happening inside you, until you cultivate the skill to work with your emotions rather than being controlled by them, until you examine your beliefs and consciously choose which ones to keep and which ones to release. Now let me tell you about something that happens when you actually start doing this work, something that most people don't expect. When you begin to develop real emotional intelligence, when you start examining your patterns and beliefs, you go through a phase that can be disorienting. You start seeing how much of your behavior has been automatic, how many of your choices weren't really choices at all, but just patterns running. And you start seeing this in other people too. You see the patterns, the defenses, the unexamined beliefs, and it can make you feel very alone because most people are not doing this work. Most people are not examining themselves at this level. Most people are just living on autopilot, reacting from their conditioning, operating from their patterns, completely unaware that there's another way to live. And when you become aware of this, when you see it clearly, it can be isolating. You're operating from a different place than most people around you. This is what Carl Jung was talking about when he wrote about individuation. Individuation is the process of becoming a whole, integrated individual. It's the process of differentiating yourself from the collective, from the unconscious mass behavior of humanity. It's the process of becoming conscious of your patterns, your conditioning, your beliefs, and then choosing deliberately who you want to be. And it's a lonely path because you're stepping away from the comfort of the herd, from the safety of just doing what everyone else does. But it's also the path to real freedom, because when you're not just automatically reacting from conditioning, when you're not just operating from patterns, when you're actually present and conscious and choosing, you have power, you have agency, you have the ability to shape your experience and your life in ways that unconscious people simply can't. Jung wrote that most people would do anything at all to avoid facing themselves, to avoid looking at their shadow, their unconscious patterns, their unexamined beliefs. And he was right. People will stay busy, stay distracted, stay numbed, stay in denial, anything to avoid the discomfort of real self-examination. But that avoidance comes at a cost. The cost is your life. The cost is living on autopilot, reacting rather than responding, being controlled by patterns you're not even aware of. And here's something else Jung understood. The patterns that control you from the unconscious don't just affect you, they affect everyone around you. Your unexamined patterns show up in your relationships. They show up in how you parent your children. They show up in your work. They show up in every interaction you have. When you're operating from unconscious patterns, you're not really present. You're not really seeing the other person. You're reacting to your projection of them, your model of them, your expectations and fears and needs, but you're not actually meeting them. Real relationship, real intimacy, real connection only becomes possible when you've done enough work on yourself that you can actually be present. When you're not just reacting from your patterns, when you can see another person clearly rather than through the filter of your conditioning. This is why personal growth work is not selfish. It's actually one of the most generous things you can do. Because when you work on yourself, when you become more conscious, more present, more integrated, everyone around you benefits. Your relationships improve, your impact increases, You become capable of showing up in ways that unconscious people simply can't. But again, it requires work. It requires willingness. It requires commitment. There's no shortcut. There's no bypassing the discomfort. You have to be willing to feel what you've been avoiding. You have to be willing to look at what you've been denying. You have to be willing to sit with uncertainty and not knowing. This is the price of consciousness. This is what it costs to actually wake up and live deliberately. Now let me talk about a specific aspect of this work that trips up a lot of people. When you start examining your beliefs, when you start questioning your patterns, there can be a tendency to get caught in analysis paralysis, to get so focused on understanding yourself that you never actually take action, to get so caught up in processing and reflecting and analyzing that you're still stuck in the same patterns. You're just now intellectually aware of them. This is a trap. Understanding is necessary, but not sufficient. You have to take action. You have to practice new ways of being. You have to put yourself in situations that challenge your old patterns and give you opportunities to respond differently. You can't think your way to change. You have to practice your way to change. You have to create new experiences that build new neural pathways. This means you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. You have to be willing to do things that feel awkward or unfamiliar. If you have a pattern of withdrawing, you have to practice staying engaged, even when you feel the urge to withdraw. If you have a pattern of people-pleasing, you have to practice setting boundaries even when you feel guilty. If you have a pattern of controlling, you have to practice letting go even when you feel anxious. The new behavior won't feel natural at first. It will feel forced, artificial, wrong. But that's just because it's unfamiliar. With repetition, it becomes more natural. With practice, it becomes integrated. Think of it like learning a new physical skill, learning to play an instrument or a sport or to dance. At first, every movement is conscious, deliberate, awkward. You're thinking about every detail. But with practice, it becomes fluid. It becomes natural. It becomes embodied. Psychological change works the same way. You have to practice the new pattern until it becomes procedural, until it becomes automatic, until it becomes just how you are. And during that practice phase, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to mess up, you're going to fall back into old patterns. That's normal. That's part of the process. The key is to notice when you fall back, to be compassionate with yourself about it, and to consciously re-engage with the new pattern. Don't beat yourself up for messing up. Don't catastrophize it. Don't use it as evidence that you can't change. Just notice, oh, there's the old pattern again. And then consciously choose the new response. This is where self-compassion becomes crucial. If you're harsh and critical with yourself every time you make a mistake, every time you fall back into an old pattern, you're creating an environment that makes change harder, because now you're not just dealing with the old pattern, you're also dealing with the shame and self-criticism about having the old pattern. You're layering suffering on top of suffering. Instead, you need to approach this process with kindness toward yourself. Recognize that you're doing something difficult. You're rewiring patterns that have been in place for decades. Of course, it's not going to happen overnight. Of course, you're going to stumble. That's not failure, that's learning. Every time you notice the old pattern and choose differently, even if it's after the fact, even if it's just recognizing it in reflection, that's progress. That's building awareness. That's creating the foundation for change. And here's something beautiful that happens when you approach yourself with compassion. The nervous system relaxes. When you're in self-criticism mode, you're activating threat responses. You're triggering shame, which is one of the most painful emotions humans can experience. And when you're in shame, when you're in threat mode, learning is impaired. Change is harder. You're activating the very survival patterns you're trying to move beyond. But when you approach yourself with kindness, with understanding, with compassion, you're creating safety. You're signaling to your nervous system that it's okay, you're not in danger, you can relax. And in that relaxed state, learning becomes possible. Change becomes easier. You can access the parts of your brain that are capable of flexibility and growth. Self-compassion isn't self-indulgence, it's strategic. It's creating the conditions that make change possible. Now, I want to talk about another layer of this work that most people don't understand. When you examine your beliefs, when you look at your patterns, you often find that they're not just personal, they're cultural, they're collective. You've absorbed beliefs from your family, from your society, from your culture, from your religion, from the media, from everywhere. And many of these beliefs were never consciously chosen. They were just absorbed through osmosis, through repetition, through immersion, in a particular worldview. And here's what's interesting. Many of these collective beliefs are invisible to you until you step outside the culture that holds them. If everyone around you believes something, it doesn't even register as a belief. It just seems like reality, like the way things are. You don't question it because you don't even realize it's questionable. But when you start examining your psychology deeply, you start bumping into these collective beliefs, and you realize, wait, this isn't just my personal issue. This is something bigger. This is a cultural pattern. This is a belief system that I inherited. And that recognition can be liberating because it helps you see that there's nothing inherently wrong with you. You're not defective. You're not broken. You just absorbed the conditioning of your environment like everyone does. But it can also be disorienting because if these beliefs aren't true, if they're just cultural constructs, then what is true? What can you rely on? This is where many people get scared and turn back. They'd rather hold on to the familiar beliefs, even if they're limiting, than face the uncertainty of questioning everything. But if you can tolerate that uncertainty, if you can sit with not knowing, something opens up. You start to realize that you have the ability to examine beliefs, to question them, to consciously choose which ones to keep and which ones to release. You're not just passively receiving conditioning. You can be an active participant in shaping your own psychology. This is what it means to become conscious. This is what it means to wake up. You're no longer just reacting from programming. You're observing the programming, examining it, and choosing what to do with it. And that's power. Real power. Not power over others, but power over your own mind, your own responses, your own life. But let me be clear about something. This work is not about perfection. It's not about becoming some ideal version of yourself, where you never have negative emotions or difficult patterns. That's not realistic. That's not human. You're always going to have emotions. You're always going to have reactions. You're always going to have patterns. The question is whether you're aware of them and whether you have some degree of choice in how they express. The goal is not to eliminate your humanity. The goal is to become more fully human, more fully yourself, to integrate all the different parts of you, including the parts you've rejected or denied or been ashamed of. Carl Jung called this shadow work, integrating the shadow. The shadow is everything about yourself that you've disowned, everything you've pushed out of conscious awareness because it didn't fit your self-image or because it wasn't acceptable in your environment. And the shadow doesn't go away just because you're not conscious of it. It's still there, operating in the background, influencing you in ways you don't recognize. It shows up in projection, where you see in others what you deny in yourself. It shows up in emotional overreactions, where you have a disproportionate response to something that's touching on a disowned part of you. It shows up in self-sabotage, where part of you undermines what another part of you is trying to achieve. Integrating the shadow means turning toward those disowned parts, acknowledging them, accepting them, bringing them back into conscious awareness, not acting them out destructively, but recognizing that they're part of you. And paradoxically, when you stop fighting against these parts, when you stop trying to keep them suppressed, they lose their power over you. What you resist persists. What you accept transforms. This is deep psychological work. This is not superficial self-improvement. This is actually restructuring your relationship with yourself. And it can be messy. It can bring up things that are uncomfortable, but it's also profoundly liberating because you're no longer at war with yourself. You're no longer splitting your energy between the acceptable parts and the unacceptable parts. You're becoming whole, and when you become more whole, when you integrate more of yourself, you have more energy available because you're not constantly using energy to suppress and deny. You're not constantly maintaining defenses and facades. You can be more authentic, more spontaneous, more alive. This is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming a whole individual, integrated, conscious, awake. Now let's talk about how all of this applies to relationships, because this is where a lot of people get stuck. You can do all the personal work, you can develop emotional intelligence, you can examine your beliefs, but then you get into relationship and suddenly all the old patterns come roaring back. Why? Because relationships trigger attachment patterns. They activate the deepest, oldest parts of your conditioning. The patterns you developed in your earliest relationships, usually with your parents or primary caregivers, those patterns are the blueprint for how you relate to others. And here's what's challenging. Those early attachment patterns are largely unconscious. They're pre-verbal. They were established before you had language, before you could think conceptually. They're encoded as felt experience, as body memory, as procedural knowledge. So you can understand intellectually that your parents were limited in certain ways, that they did the best they could, that your childhood wasn't anyone's fault. But that understanding doesn't necessarily change the deep patterns. When you get into a relationship, when you become close to someone, when you become vulnerable, those old patterns activate. If you had an anxious attachment style, you might become clingy, needy, hypervigilant for signs of rejection. If you had an avoidant attachment style, you might become distant, uncomfortable with too much closeness, quick to withdraw when things get intense. If you had a disorganized attachment style, you might swing between these extremes, wanting closeness but fearing it at the same time. And the tricky part is these patterns often play out with people who have complementary patterns. Anxious people often pair with avoidant people, and they create a dynamic where the anxious person's pursuit triggers the avoidant person's withdrawal, which then intensifies the anxious person's pursuit, which triggers more withdrawal. It's a dance, a pattern that both people are participating in, often without realizing it. Breaking these relationship patterns requires awareness at a very deep level. You have to be able to notice when the old attachment pattern is activating. You have to be able to feel the familiar pull, the familiar fear, the familiar strategy for dealing with closeness or distance. And then you have to be able to consciously choose a different response, not just suppressing the old pattern, but actually doing something different, practicing a new way of relating. This is incredibly difficult because relationships are the place where we're most vulnerable, where the stakes feel highest, where our nervous system is most activated. It's one thing to practice emotional regulation when you're alone or in low-stakes situations. It's quite another to do it when you're triggered in relationship, when someone you care about is doing something that activates your deepest fears. But this is also where the most profound growth can happen, because relationships are a mirror. They show you your patterns in ways that nothing else can. They bring to the surface everything that's been lurking in the unconscious, and if you can stay present, if you can resist the urge to just react automatically, if you can observe what's happening and choose consciously, you can actually rewire these deep attachment patterns. This requires a partner who's also willing to do the work, who's also committed to consciousness, who's also able to take responsibility for their patterns. Because if only one person is doing the work, the relationship becomes lopsided. The conscious person becomes the therapist, constantly managing both their patterns and the other person's patterns. That's not sustainable. Real growth in relationship happens when both people are committed to seeing their patterns, owning them, and working with them. And here's something beautiful that can happen in conscious relationship. When both people are doing their work, when both people are committed to awareness and growth, the relationship becomes a crucible for transformation. It becomes a safe container where both people can bring their full selves, including the parts they've been afraid to show. They can practice vulnerability, practice authentic communication, practice being with discomfort without running away or attacking. This kind of relationship is rare because it requires two people who are willing to do something that goes against all their conditioning. It requires them to stay present when every fiber of their being wants to protect, to defend, to attack, to withdraw. It requires them to be honest about their patterns, their fears, their needs, even when that honesty feels dangerous. It requires them to trust that the relationship is strong enough to hold that level of truth. But when it works, when both people are genuinely showing up, it creates a depth of intimacy that most people never experience. Because they're not relating to masks, to personas, to the carefully constructed images. They're relating to the real, messy, complicated, beautiful human being underneath. And that's where real love becomes possible. Not love for who you want the person to be, but love for who they actually are. Now, I want to come back to something I mentioned earlier, because it's absolutely crucial. Self-compassion. Throughout this entire process of psychological growth, of examining patterns, of working with emotions, of integrating shadow, of transforming relationships, self-compassion has to be the foundation, because without it, this work becomes another way to beat yourself up, another impossible standard you're failing to meet, another source of shame. Many people approach psychological development with a harsh, critical mindset. They see their patterns and judge themselves for having them. They notice their emotions and see them as weakness. They observe their shadow and feel disgusted. And then they wonder why the work isn't creating more peace, why they're not feeling better, why they seem stuck despite all the effort. The reason is they're bringing the same harsh, critical energy to the work that created the patterns in the first place. Many of those limiting beliefs, those protective patterns, those shadow parts, they developed because you didn't feel safe, because you felt you had to be a certain way to be acceptable, to be loved, to belong. And now you're approaching the work of transformation with that same energy of, you're not okay as you are, you need to change, there's something wrong with you. And that just reinforces the original wound. Real transformation requires a different energy. It requires you to look at your patterns with curiosity rather than judgment, to observe your emotions with interest rather than criticism, to examine your shadow with compassion rather than disgust. You have to create an internal environment where all parts of you feel safe enough to emerge, to be seen, to be integrated. This doesn't mean being indulgent with yourself. It doesn't mean avoiding responsibility. It means approaching yourself the way you would approach a child who's struggling, with kindness, with understanding, with patience, recognizing that you're doing your best, that you've been trying to survive, that you develop these patterns for good reasons even if they're not serving you anymore. When you bring that quality of compassion to the work, everything changes. The nervous system relaxes, the defenses soften, the parts that have been hidden feel safe enough to emerge, and transformation becomes possible in a way it simply isn't when you're operating from self-criticism and shame. So as you move through this process, as you examine your emotions and beliefs and patterns, keep checking in with yourself. Am I approaching this with kindness? Am I being patient with myself? Am I recognizing my humanity? Or am I beating myself up? Am I demanding perfection? Am I treating myself harshly? Because how you relate to yourself in this process will determine what becomes possible. Let me bring this all together now. What we've been exploring is a comprehensive understanding of human psychology, of how emotions work, how beliefs shape experience, how patterns develop and perpetuate themselves, how change actually happens. And the core message is this: most people are living unconsciously, reacting from conditioning, controlled by patterns they don't even see. And that unconsciousness creates suffering for themselves and for everyone around them. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can develop consciousness, you can develop emotional intelligence, you can examine your beliefs, you can observe your patterns, you can practice new ways of being, you can integrate your shadow, you can create genuine intimacy, you can live deliberately rather than automatically. But it requires work, real work, consistent work, work that never really ends because you're never finished growing. And most people won't do it. They'll stay on autopilot. They'll stay comfortable with their familiar patterns, even if those patterns create suffering. They'll avoid the discomfort of self-examination. They'll resist the uncertainty of questioning their beliefs. And that's their choice. There's no judgment in that. Everyone is on their own path, doing what they're capable of doing. But if you're listening to this, if these words are landing, if something in you is recognizing truth here, then maybe you're ready. Maybe you're willing to do what most people won't do. Maybe you're willing to turn toward yourself with curiosity and compassion. Maybe you're willing to examine the patterns that have been running your life. Maybe you're willing to sit with discomfort in service of growth. Maybe you're willing to become conscious. If so, understand this. The work is not linear. You won't just steadily improve in a straight line. You'll have breakthroughs and setbacks. You'll have periods of rapid growth and periods where it feels like nothing's changing. You'll discover new layers of patterns just when you thought you had it figured out. This is normal. This is the process. Trust it. Stay with it. Keep practicing. Keep examining. Keep choosing consciousness over reactivity. Keep choosing awareness over avoidance. Keep choosing growth over comfort. Not because you're trying to become perfect, but because you're committed to becoming more fully yourself, more fully human, more fully alive. And along the way, be gentle with yourself. Recognize that you're doing something most people never even attempt. You're questioning the unconscious programming that runs most of human behavior. You're developing capacities that take years to mature. You're rewiring neural pathways that have been in place for decades. That's profound work. Honor it. Respect it. Be patient with yourself as you do it. Because ultimately, this work is not just about you. When you become more conscious, when you integrate your shadow, when you develop emotional intelligence, everyone around you benefits. Your relationships improve, your presence becomes more grounded, your impact becomes more positive. You become capable of showing up in ways that unconscious people simply can't. You become a force for consciousness in a world that desperately needs more of it. So if you're ready, if you're willing, begin where you are. Start noticing your emotions. Start observing your patterns. Start questioning your beliefs. Start practicing new responses. Start being kind to yourself in the process. Start the journey of becoming conscious, because that journey, that commitment to awareness and growth, that's what makes a life worth living. That's what creates meaning. That's what allows you to look back at your life and know that you didn't just exist. You didn't just go through the motions. You actually lived. You actually showed up. You actually became who you were capable of becoming. And that is the invitation. Not to be perfect, not to transcend your humanity, but to fully embrace it, to become conscious within it, to live deliberately, to respond rather than react, to choose rather than default, to grow rather than stagnate, to wake up rather than sleepwalk through your one precious life. The choice is yours. It always has been. The question is, what will you choose?